anyone can create, anyone can come up with an idea, but the idea really means something when it has foundations.
We've been colleagues for more than 4 years now. We've done multiple projects from the toughest times to the easiest times to everything. And I've never worked with a person who's as positive as him. And I'm talking about Mr. Matthew Abbott.
Okay, now I'm not very good at looking at the lens, so I've just got to look
This is
there,
very
right?
good, yeah.
Okay, because I end up looking over there or something.
It's already on and it's already working right now. So
All
hi
right.
everybody.
Hey.
I am with Matthew and we are just catching up after a long time. It's been what, 6 months or something? It's about 8 months.
At least 6 months. So now
So,
I've
yeah.
been cornered. So let's do this.
All right, Matthew, tell us about your story as a designer, first of all.
My story. Okay, well, it's a long, arduous story, but you know, it really, I mean, we were just talking about this over dinner. It kind of covers all of the disciplines of design, really. You know, I started working in a very, very small studio in London for a brand called Borough at the time. We were based in Covent Garden. I started as an assistant in the pattern cutting room, and then I was cutting some patterns. You know, I did this for a couple of years and then was promoted to production manager. And I was a production manager for them for, again, a couple of years, you know, working with factories, logistics, you know, really kind of just helping support the designers and, you know, make their dreams a reality. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I went to work for a guy called Nigel Hall, who at the time was a very big menswear designer, based in Covent Garden again. And I was his right hand, you know. So again, we'd do all the shows together. We would cut patterns,
Yeah,
you know.
carry
I
on.
would
Let me just
produce
keep checking.
samples.
Yeah, it's running.
Yeah. So, so just all manner of things. And then after that, you know, I really wanted to get into kind of more, you know, bigger organizations, because it was very much a mum and pop shop. You know,
Okay.
I was doing everything,
Yeah.
which was great, but you know, I really wanted to kind of, as I say, get into a bigger organization. And then I started working for a high street supplier. We were, you know, working with the likes of BHS, Next, Debenhams, you know, designing men's and boys wear, coming with our big design presentations, presenting to the buyers, and then heading off to Sri Lanka to develop the product. It was mainly knits. And I did that for about a year. And then after that, well, actually at the end of that year, I got made redundant, you know, and this was just before Christmas. I get pulled into the office of the owner, and I'm thinking, wow, this is great. I'm going to get a pay rise. You know, so I'm there 5 days before Christmas thinking, oh, this is going to be the best end of year. And then, you know, 5 minutes later, I'm walking out, tidying up my desk. And then I walk out in the middle of the rain with 2 bags. I'm getting wet. And it was just like something straight out of a, you know, a kind of just a comedy film, really. It was horrendous. So that happened. But then by chance, I fell into a women's wear opportunity. And ended up working with a woman called Maya Fines, who had a fashion brand, and actually coincidentally introduced me to my wife later on, many years. But we showed at London Fashion Week. We had a studio space in Notting Hill, and I sewed up myself, pattern cut and sewed up the best part of 80 outfits.
Fantastic.
And we showed at London Fashion Week, and you know, we were in the Guardian. We then got some pieces into Selfridges and into Liberty, and you know, we had a bit of a moment, and that was quite interesting. But it was women's wear, you know, and women's wear was never my passion. I was always going to be a menswear designer. And so I took myself out of that. I had a brief sojourn of working with a woman called Lady Victoria Harvey, which I won't go into it, but it was the worst job I've ever had, and it was in women's wear. And anyway, it's defunct now, so it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But then I thought, right, enough of this women's wear stuff. I'm taking myself out, and I went to America.
Okay.
Just to travel around California and just kind of get back in touch with who I was about, you know. So I spent 3 months on the road, just traveling around, getting inspired, you know, time in the desert in dingy motels and all that sort of thing. And then came back to the UK, managed to pick up some freelance bits of work here and there.
Yeah.
Ended up working with a guy called Douglas Cordeau, and he had a studio that was designing for Pepe jeans. And I ended up working with him on Pepe product and a Japanese brand called Etionozeki, and we were doing denim for a brand called Purple Pin.
Okay.
And so I did that for a little while, and you know, started to really get this flavor of jeans,
Yeah.
and denim.
All right. So
But-
that's where your denim.
So that's where it really all
Episode
started.
began, yeah.
Well, it all really started when I started wearing Pepe jeans when I was 12 and collecting them because I loved the coloured keyring, plastic
Okay.
keyrings at the time. But in terms of my career, it really started then. And yeah, so did that for a few months, but then was approached by Timberland.
Okay.
And well, I was approached by an agency for a job at Timberland. Got offered a job with Pepe Jeans at the time, full time, but also Timberland, and I went down the Timberland route. So then I was part of the team that launched Timberland Europe, and I was designing everything. It was a dream job, you know, outerwear, sweaters, pants, jeans, shirts, you name it, t-shirts. I was doing graphics, just everything. So it was.
This was around which year?
This was 2003.
Okay.
2003, and it also opened me up to design inspiration, but design inspiration in a pure design inspiration sense.
Yeah.
That's where we invented the Earthkeeper story. We would travel to Cuba, travel to Iceland, all over the place, just to really develop stories, rich stories born from nothing.
Which doesn't happen anymore, right?
I mean, that was a golden time, probably never to be repeated.
Yeah.
I'm sure it doesn't happen, but I was very, very fortunate to be a part of that story then. So I spent a couple of years there, but then another opportunity came up, which was to be a part of the Dockers story. And Dockers, part of Levi's, based in Amsterdam. They were doing a great story at the time called Made in History, which was all, you know, inspired by the dock workers, you know, very industrial kind of canvases and chinos. And then I went for it. So lived in Amsterdam for about 4 months, and then moved down to Belgium and lived in Brussels for 4 years. And then I worked my way up there to become the design manager for Dockers Europe.
Right.
And obviously fully integrated within the Levi's world as well, exposed to, you know, going to the Levi's archive for inspiration, and it was really there that I learned about historical inspiration. You know, I'd had that true inspiration model, and then suddenly we're going back into archives and vintage, and then kind of configuring those stories into a kind of modern narrative, but really starting to learn, you know, about going back in time to tell stories. Which was a very rich time, and great to be in Europe and exposed to all that offers. But then after that, I was approached by an agent in New York to go and work for Calvin Klein. And, you know, after 7 months of interviewing, meeting everybody in Calvin Klein, they offered me the role to be the director of design for Calvin Klein retail for North America.
All right.
So my wife and I moved to New York.
It changed everything.
Sydney Young.
Sydney, I want you to come work for me at Sharp's Magazine in New York. This is your shot.
And, you know, I headed up design for that department for 3.5 years. which was great, you know, really kind
Yeah.
of digging into the retail side of a major iconic brand. And then I had a very, I went to work for Original Penguin for a year, which was part of Perry Ellis organization.
Yeah.
And I headed up all products, which was really interesting because it wasn't just apparel. It was fragrance. It was
okay.
glasses. It was leatherware. It was shoes. And they basically wanted my design direction on all products. So I was involved in everything.
Nice.
You know,
Wow.
the fragrance was super interesting. You know, coming with a bottle of rum, saying I want a fragrance that smells like that, with some woody undertones.
So now I'm curious about fragrances. Like how it must be very subjective, right? How do you relate to what could be the right kind of fragrance? What was the basis of your decision?
Well, Original Penguin, well, okay, this is a very interesting subject because Original Penguin had a very strong brand DNA. And everything really should go back to the brand DNA of whatever
Yeah,
brand
okay.
that you're working
Alright.
for. So brand DNA, you know, it was born in the 50s. It had a very kind of hipster following. You know, we did photo shoots in Nashville, things like that. So you had those tattooed hipsters, very,
Nice,
very
yeah.
kind of cool, very music, you know, kind of led as well. You know, it was very kind of would sponsor festivals, that sort of thing.
All right.
So it just kind of had this sensibility, and then you would dig into that, and you would create, you know, this this identity. You had this kind of customer, very specific customer in mind, and then you would always try and relate a fragrance back to him. What's he drinking? What's he doing? Where's he hanging out? What's he into? And then you start to create this scent. This scent comes that is kind of attached to the DNA of that guy, whoever he is.
Yeah.
And you know, it was, but then that's the same thing with any brand. It was the same thing with the boot at Timberland. Every season, we'd start with a yellow boot.
Oh
Yeah, because it's the
Yeah.
icon
Yeah.
of Timberland.
Yeah.
So we go, right, okay, well, here we are again. It's the yellow boot. And we're like,
Yeah.
okay, so what are we gonna do new here with this boot? But you know, you build everything from the foundation up.
Yeah.
And so then when you have a story, it's solid. You know,
Right,
it's
yeah.
immovable.
Yeah.
It goes back to the very core and the essence of the brand, you know. So spent a year at Original Penguin, and then was approached by Calvin again when Calvin acquired Warnaco,
Yeah.
took over the Calvin Klein jeans business, and asked to head up design for jeans and become a VP of design for Calvin Klein jeans,
All right.
which of course I was incredibly happy to do. And stayed there for 5 years, heading up men's and women's for North America, Canada, and Mexico region, and a couple of years of those were spent working with Raf Simons, and that whole story that came on board.
Yeah.
So that was 5 years, and then you know, then it was like,
I
okay,
don't
you know
if-
what?
If I put maths together, how many years? Like hundreds of years of what?
It's about 107 years of experience. No, it's it's about 28 years. I don't know.
That's how
something.
we calculate, right? Like 2 + 2 is what, 5?
Yeah,
6?
I mean, well, New York is like dog years. You know, I was there for almost 10 years. It felt like 50.
Yeah.
You know, so but I miss it. I say to people, it's where I grew up, basically. You know, because it was harsh and hard on many levels, but the best learning I could ever had, basically.
Great.
But then, you know, we wanted to move back to the UK. UK beckoned, family beckoned, getting closer to family. And then it was like, well, now time to launch into consultancy, you know, and here we are, you know, 4+ years of working with Arvind
Yeah.
on the denim side, working with a Chinese milk or Huajin on the non-denim side, and then other projects that have come my way, you know, whether it be in Scotland, whether it be in Sri Lanka, or whether it be anywhere, you know, lots of other sort of micro projects. That's it in a nutshell, you know. That's that's my
That's
my
your entire
history.
story,
That's
yeah.
the timeline. So,
But tell me
yeah.
something. How do you manage to be consultant to multiple this thing? Do you have a team? How do you scale up your work? How do you manage to deliver stuff?
Well, I mean, I suppose I have a team in the kind of loosest sense of the word. I suppose working for organizations, you learn the value of your cross-functional peers,
Yeah.
which is a very good lesson to learn
Yeah.
in terms of managing.
Yes.
And one of the great things I learned about managing from Calvin was how to manage up. Up and across. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one thing to manage your team directly,
Yeah.
but to manage your cross-functional peers and to manage up is something
Yeah.
quite special. And that has helped me in my career post leaving Calvin,
Yeah.
is about how to call on people, how to call on the skill set within my network.
Yeah.
And, I'm very fortunate to have a rich network. And, if I need a bit of post-production done, if I need a bit of graphic work done, if I need some 3D done,
You know the right people.
I've got the right people. I can manage that on a cross-functional perspective.
Yeah.
I can manage customers, from a cross-functional perspective.
Yeah.
I can manage customers when I'm in front of customers, and you're in front of customers, you're kind of managing up, because you're trying to present them, you're trying to convince them about your ideas, your concepts.
Yeah.
So you're managing up in that respect. So, that's kind of how I have my own kind of coping mechanisms.
Got it.
With regards to
So let
that.
me explain it what I understand, because that could also make things easier for youngsters as well. What I understand is, let's say if you are a consultant to let's say any mill or any brand. Now that is your, let's say, your client, for example. But you definitely are aware about what the client's customer or the consumer really wants. That is where you start educating the client, giving your feedback, your trend analysis, everything put together, and then you package that, and you even educate your client that this is how the presentation should be done, this is how the communication should be done, so that the final consumer who's going to buy out of them is going to respond positively. Is that pretty much like that, or it's a different thing?
No, it's pretty much like that, but it really starts with research, and it starts with digging into the customer.
Yeah.
Obviously, understanding the technology, understanding your product, all those things are important, but it sort of means very little if you don't understand who you're putting it in front of. And you've got to really dig into the customer, understand their consumer, understand their DNA, understand their current assortment, what's working, what's not.
Yeah.
And you just got to really do the research. You've got to put the hours in, the time in, build up, a portfolio of them.
Yeah.
And only then do you then go into designing your collection, designing, the range, merchandising, all of that sort of stuff. But it's really about putting in that research to begin with.
Yeah, so I think you definitely keep yourself on ground, knowing about what's happening in stores, or what is coming, what's expected, or what is
Constantly.
to be bought.
I mean, I'm constantly in the stores, but obviously the stores only give you one aspect.
And a little older news.
Well, it's old news.
Yeah,
it
it's
is
already
old
done,
news.
yeah.
But what I'm constantly doing is connecting with people in the industry, people that I've connected with in the past.
Yeah.
We're talking, how's business, what's happening with you, but also actually keeping abreast of socio-economic things.
Yeah.
Watching the news, watching the right news, what's happening in the world, what's happening with people's behavioral patterns, and understanding things that can influence buying habits,
Right.
but just really kind of digging into that as well.
Yeah.
It's all aspects,
Yeah.
and those things obviously feed trends, they feed movements. So you've kind of got to have your finger on lots of different pulses,
True. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just researching into the brand, because that's very one-dimensional. And then also, looking at the technology or whatever brand whatever company you're working with, what technologies are they using? How
Yeah.
do they want to promote those? what technologies are going on in the world? How are people
Yeah.
promoting themselves?
Yeah.
Whether it be through socials or whatever.
Yeah.
Just having a completely holistic approach.
That's
to it.
so much important, which I think lots of youngsters, at least here in India, they tend to forget. What they mostly focus is on what's in stores
Yeah.
and what the designers are doing, and
It's a very small part of it.
Yeah.
It's a very, very small part of it.
exactly.
Yeah, you've got to look at all of the disciplines of design. You know, I like to have a very, well, I used to have a 3-tier philosophy, which has become more of a 4-tier philosophy. But the 3-tier used to be called my Tao. And it stood for me. It was just a thing that I had in my head, which was true archive opportunity.
Okay.
The truth was true inspiration. How to get inspiration from nothing.
Okay.
Archive was going back in the past, looking at worked in the past, creating a story from the past. You may go back 50 years, 60 years, you may go back 2 years, but looking back to learn.
So this is what we call design case study. Is it something like that? Like
Yes,
where-
exactly,
Okay,
exactly. And then there's the opportunity. And opportunity is spending time in the market, studying what's working from a business perspective.
Yeah.
The opportunity is what can you see to maximize, you know. But then, as I said, there's a 4th tier from that, which has become technology,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
And technology obviously then creates opportunities, it creates movements, trends, stories, all the rest of it. But, you know, keeping this kind of very simple philosophy and then kind of combining all of those things where you get the best results.
Amazing. Wow.
Right.
Okay, so I think the main topic I would like to hear from you is mostly designers, they come up to the level of, let's say, a senior designer, and then maybe become a design manager, and they start holding things around in terms of creating a collection, and that's the limit mostly people reach to as a threshold. Now, the next level I would understand is more of becoming a creative director, where it is a holistic responsibility and of aesthetics from all the angles, right? So, what are the tips that you'd like to share with the crowd about being that creative director? Which, you know, like, just tell us. I could not even.
I mean, I suppose it starts, well, if you're a creative director for a brand,
Yeah.
you're having foundations for the brand, and always, whatever you create, being able to tie it back to the foundations of the brand.
Yeah.
Anyone can create. Anyone can come up with an idea.
Yeah.
But the idea really means something when it has foundations,
Yeah.
when it has a solid base, because you'll come up against so many people who the first thing they want to do is destroy your idea.
Yeah.
Right,
That's very
right.
natural. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you can tie it back to the foundation of a brand,
The DNA.
of a story, the DNA,
Yeah.
you know, it makes it a lot harder for them
It does.
to knock it down.
Yeah.
And, you know, with my experience at Calvin was about sensuality, skin, sexy. It was all of that. So everything tied back to that. The boot, you know, Timberland was the boot.
Yeah.
It was about functionalism. It was workwear.
Yeah.
It stood for that. Dockers, it was about the chino. Everything went back to the 2x1 twill, you know? So it had the foundation. It was America. It was all of those sorts of things. But then it doesn't mean you can create and you can go off and you can do beautiful things. But always work on that narrative of how you can bring it back to brand. And then you've got something solid that no one is going to be able to destroy.
True.
Because as a creative person, the first thing they will challenge you. They want to break it down. The business, they want to say, yeah, is this worth its weight? You know,
Yeah.
so they're going to challenge you. They're going to, you know, knock you about a bit. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
because
yeah.
at the end of the day, they want to sell.
Yeah.
And, you know, so if they're going to put their faith in your idea, they want to know, can it stand a few knocks? You know, so yeah, always tie it back to something, you know, foundations that are solid, you know, basically.
Got it. Got it.
One quality that I really admire about Matthew is that he's a great listener. That is something that I learned from him as well, and I'm also learning to be a great listener, because that is when you learn new things, right? Till then, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon and share it, whatever you like to do. I'll see you. Bye.